How come it that none of the many shogunates overthrew the emperor and claimed his title? If you ask this question, the typical answer is because the shogun needed the emperor for legitimacy and because the people believed he was divine. However, that is not the answer you will get from watching this video. I want you to stop thinking about Japan as a country. Rather, I want you to think about it as a collective narrative that you can either fit into or be left out of. Then I will tell you the story about how one legendary leader once became the pivot of this narrative. The name of this leader is simply inherited from his grandfather as Hohodemi, but in the narrative he is called Kamo Yamato Iwabiko no Suma Maikoto, the divine Yamato Iwara Prince Sovereign. Sumira Mikoto is also pronounced Tennō, which is why he is remembered as Jinmu Tennō, the first emperor of Japan. This video is about Jimmu's eastern conquest of Yamato. To make it, I used David Chart's Myth of Jinmu Tennō to get his insight into the Kiki legends, and Michael Speidel's Dawn of Japan, Emperor Jimmu with his gods and warriors on 3rd century bronze mirrors, as insight into the relevant artifacts. Also, Stephen Nojiri's Samurai Traditions of the Tada Genji, which insight was used for extra commentary. Now, shall we begin the story? Before we dig into the conquest, we must first find out when it took place. Here I have presented the traditional timeline which pinpoints Jimmu to 660 BC. However, there's also an alternative timeline that moves Jimmu 910 years into the second half of the 2nd century. Personally, while doing research on the topic, I have been convinced that the alternative timeline is more likely to be historically accurate. Let me explain why. First off, the traditional timeline. It has Jimmu at 660 BC as part of the 10 long-lived emperors up to Sujin at 97 BC. Sujin being our first emperor who has been historically confirmed by the Chinese. However, the scholarly consensus is that these dates are out of the question, since the political body required for an emperor doesn't appear until the 1st century. This brings us to the Kiki legends, that is, the collections of myths from the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. These writings are dated to the early 7th century, and although they were written by the Japanese themselves, it was done using Sinitic, that is, Chinese characters, since kana was first being used 100 years later. It also means that everything up to here was passed down orally. The Kiki legends agree with the traditional timeline when it comes to dates. However, it is clear that these stories are based on origin myths of particular families, and it looks as though they were designed to explain their names. This brings us to one of many theories that says it was possible the writers of the Kiki legends had access to the Chinese records, and that influenced their work. There's good reasons to be skeptical of these works, especially the Nihon Shoki, which in current form may actually be as late as the 10th century, but does preserve genuinely ancient traditions. It is around this time the Fujiwara clan dominated the courts. I don't want to go on a tangent here, so let's just say they were infamous for not playing the ball to the other kids in the court playground. It is possible that this clan influenced the Nihon Shoki to give their ancestors a more important role. As the Fujiwara clan rose to the top, other clans fell. We know of 2 clans who, in attempt to reclaim lost importance, wrote their own version of the Kiki legends. The Mononobe clan, which was a very important clan of early Yamato court, responsible for war, wrote the Sendai Kuchi-Hungi. The Inabe clan, which served a religious function, preparing and taking care of offerings, wrote the Kokushui. Now, when we zoom out, you can see why the traditional timeline is so controversial. Now then, here I present the modern alternative timeline. Jimmu is sent 910 years into the second half of the 2nd century, while Sujin is also moved up 400 years to the 3rd century, making him a more direct successor to Jimmu. One reason it makes sense to move him to this time is because of Jimmu's mirror. This is an artifact dated to the Green Time Interval, and it displays some very special details about his conquest. Also, on the Yamato timeline, this is right after Queen Himiko's death in 248 AD, which could have sent the Yamato into some turmoil, giving Jimmu an incentive to start his campaign. If you found this video informative so far, remember to give it a like, because there's a lot of AI-generated slop videos on YouTube that just spoon-feed people the traditional timeline of Jimmu without giving it a second thought. Our story begins in Hyuga, a mountainous region of southern Kyushu, now modern-day Miyazaki Prefecture. Here the famous Hayato people resided, their ancestral kami being that of Ninnigi's sons. Ninnigi descended to Earth after being appointed ruler by his grandmother, the sun goddess Amaterasu. This explains why the region Hyuga means facing the sun. Here I have approximately pinpointed with a red dot the location where it is believed that Ninnigi or Higuhono no Ninnigi descended from the heavens, and also where Amaterasu hid in a cave after an encounter with her brother Susanoo. However, there is no evidence that these locations were venerated before or as a response to the publishing of the Kojiki. Also, the descent of Ninnigi is of no importance to the conquest, since that story is simply used to explain the ancestral gods of some clans. A myth that is important, however, is that of Ninnigi's son Hui or Higo-Hohodemi. To recap the story, Higo-Hohodemi traveled to the sea god's palace to find his brother's lost divine fishing hook. He made good relations with the gods there, and they helped him find the hook. He then had to return it to his brother, and to get back home he got a lift from a wani. A wani, being a kind of monster unique to Japan, is like a sea dragon crocodile whale with 4 legs. As thanks for taking him home in just a day, he gave the wani a curved sword, and Higo-Hohodemi also got 2 jewels that he could use to raise and lower the tide. And that's the important part of the story. The story does continue with him debunking a sea creature, which is told with some similarities to the story of Izanagi and Izanami. From that debunk, we then get to Jimmu's father, whose only notable feature is his really weird name. And from him we get Jimmu and his brothers, the main characters of this video. Now Jimmu had 3 brothers, Itsuse, Inai and Mikiri. Jimmu also had a son with him on the conquest named Takishimimi. This is here I want to introduce Jimmu's mirror, because these 3 characters are displayed on it. The first 3 figures on the mirror all have twin worlds at the waist, likely a badge of high birth. And as we go around the mirror, we meet the allies Jimmu meet along the story, ending with a dancer, meaning that this mirror depicts Jimmu's final victory dance. All the figures on the outer rim dances using their shields, and one thing about these shields is that all have a crescent shape on them. This matches the Hayato shield artifact found in Nara, dated to the 7th century. Now let's examine the first figure, identified as Jimmu, and compare him to his popular depiction. Starting from the bottom, we see his bare feet touch the sea, then a pair of baggy pants indicating elegance and wealth. At the waist we have the twin worlds and 2 jewels, maybe the same from the Higo-Hohodemi legend, then some kind of body armor and a long face without a beard. The iconic Hayato shield, and on the wrist an ensign or shell bracelet. A pointy hat with a round centerpiece, similar to Haniwa figures. A long spear. Then the head of a Wani with something curved from its mouth, possibly the same Wani from the Hikohodemi legend. This is the helper kami for this character, which there will be more of. The fact that he wields a spear instead of a bow is controversial, because the samurai traditions make quite a big deal out of the bow being a divine weapon and having Jimmu wield it, also having a sunbird land on his bow. But to the defense of the mirror, I want to say that this is the victory dance, or maybe it is an unstringed bow. But yeah, it could be that Jimmu never wielded a bow, who knows? The year is 248 AD. With the passing of Queen Himiko, it is made clear for all that the Yamato leadership is fractured and weak. To the south, in Hyuga, the chieftains see an opportunity and begin stockpiling for war. 2 years later, we are ready. In Takuchiu Palace, or 12,000 Years of Rise Palace, the leader Jimmu famously says, "It is, no doubt, the center of the world. Why shall we not go there and make it the capital?" We also know that the Yamato lands were very rich in rice, also a good incentive. The Hayato fleet departs from Hyuga on a course north, because before we can rule the Yamato, we must first rule all of Kyushu Island. At the Hayasu Channel, the fleet encounters their first recorded event. We spot a man riding on the back of a turtle while flapping his arms. This character is Sao Netsuhiko, the ancestor of the Yamato no Kuni. Jimmu learns that he knows the sea lanes well, so he is made an army leader to guide the expedition. This is also the fourth figure on the mirror. Now the fleet continues north, passing the Toyo province, which today is split up into Oita and Fukuoka prefecture, Oita being famous for its hot springs. Here the fleets make a stop in Usa, where we meet Usatsuhiki and Usatsuhimi, the ancestors of Usano Kunitsukuri. Together they built Ashihito Sugai Palace, near the Usa River, for the army to rest in. In the Nihonshoki there is an extra interesting detail, where Usatsuhime becomes the wife of Amano Tane, one of the gods who descended together with Ninigi, and ancestor of the Nakatomi clan. Now the interesting thing is that the Nakatomi clan later gives birth to the Fujiwara clan. Could it be that this extra detail was added by themselves later? Another very interesting detail is that Usa later becomes the home of the Hachiman tradition. You know, the kami that has 44,000 shrines dedicated to him? Hachiman Daibusatsu is related to Emperor Ujin from the mid-5th century, when Buddhism first began to enter Japan. Hachiman is a Buddhist deity, however. Hachiman arrived so early that he was venerated in a Shinto shrine in Usa, because when the emperors tried to introduce Buddhism, it was opposed by the Mononobe and Nakatomi clans. It was first in the 7th century where Emperor Jimmu would meet with Hachiman and finally proclaim the land Buddhist. Anyway, we are getting sidetracked. After resting, the Hayato set out northward to Chikusen, today's Fukuoka prefecture, famous for its shrines and shops. This is one location that is believed that Queen Himiko was ruler of, in addition to the Nara Basin. Here we stop at Okada Palace. The Kiki legends don't give many details on this place, so we just have to imagine what we did ourselves. Let's just say that we wrestled control from the locals, followed by some worshipping of the heavens. Today it is said that on top of Okada Palace, the today's Okada Shrine was built. Also, let's just for a second imagine this was Queen Himiko's HQ. Then this place would have had a big palace with multiple halls, surrounded by stockades and towers with patrolling guards. We can also bring up mirror figure 5 here. This warrior has a notable tooth gap and has been identified as a Hayato from Kyushu. The way that Hayato people are identified are by their broad bearded heads, and Yao people is by a long head, and Yamato is also a broad head, less bearded. That is like a thing archaeologists are very interested in, so every time we find a skeleton we go like, Quickly, one-way analysis. Beep, boop, 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 boop. Bling. Oh my god, he's from this place, so cool. The interesting part about this location may not be what we did when we arrived here. Rather, what we did while we stayed, as it is said that we stayed here for at least a year, possibly longer. Now I want to bring up figure 3 from the mirror. This figure has been identified as Takeshimimi, Jimmu's son. He has the twin worlds of high birth and a broad face. Also, look, he has a helper kami that looks like a snake with 2 horns. In Japanese myth, there's one famous 2-horned reptile. That is of course the Orochi dragon of Izumo. If that is indeed the Orochi dragon, then the sword he wields must be Kusanagi, the sword that Susanoo curved from the dragon's tail. According to the legend, Susanoo offered the sword to Amaterasu, his sister. Then Amaterasu handed it to Ninigi when he descended. However, Kusanagi was one of Yamato's regalia, a token of religious and political authority. The sword links the Izumo myth to the Yamato rulers. If we ignore the god item trait, that would imply that Jimmu had gotten rulership of Izumo before the victory dance. Jimmu's war strategy was to control small states linked by water, and he had a whole fleet to do that. It is possible that he posed such a threat to Izumo that they made a diplomatic solution, giving Jimmu ruler status. After securing Kyushu, the fleet embarks on its journey to the east. It sails south of the Shu province, today's Yamaguchi prefecture, which is famous for its serene beaches. Then up towards Aki province, today's Hiroshima prefecture, famous for Miyajima Island and maple leaf cakes. Here we stop at Takeri Palace for a quick 7-year rest, or maybe just a quick rest, again we get no details. After this we continue east to the powerful Kibi territory, one of the key allies of Yamato, also today's Okayama prefecture. Here we built a temporary residence called Takashima Palace, and again we don't get any details at all. But Kibi was a very important place at that time, so the fact that we stayed here is significant. Did Jimmu form an alliance, or was it just a pit stop? Now we finally reach the lands of the Yamato. The Hayato Armada arrives in Kawachi, that is the old version of Osaka. The Yamato HQ is located in the Nara Basin, surrounded by mountains. The fleet arrives into the bay area, dropping off the warriors all ready to fight. Their plan is to cross Mount Ikuma and reach the Tatsuda River, then capture the Nara Basin. Although the landing was unopposed, the Yamato are fully aware of their position. At some point, they reach the slopes of Kusai, where they spot the Yamato enemy, led by Nagasuna Hiko, or the Long-Legged Man. They pile battle upon battle upon battle. A random arrow struck Itsuse, wounding his forearm, and then they piled battle upon battle upon battle, but they could not achieve victory. The Hayato army decided to disengage, and for some reason the Yamato decided not to follow them. Maybe because they were tired themselves, or felt like they had a good position. They returned to camp, and Jimmu got the brilliant idea that attacking my enemy while facing the Sun Kami goes against the rules of the heavens. We should feign a weakness and withdraw, venerate the Kami of the heavens and earth, and then attack the enemy with the sun at our backs, with the support of the power of the Sun Kami. If we do this, the enemy will surely be defeated without the need to even bloody our swords. This idea was so thought-provoking that it would spawn a samurai tradition of calculating which direction to face depending on the time of the day before going into battle. Before leaving the camp, they did a war dance to boost morale, and then they headed towards Onominato, somewhere further south, probably as a show of force to the locals. Then finally embarked back on their boats and headed south of the Kii Peninsula. However, when we reached Wakayama, something unfortunate happened. The arrow wound on Itsuse's arm became more and more painful. It was a fatal wound. On Itsuse's deathbed, he says,
"How pitiful it is when a man should die of a wound received at the hands of a slave, and should not revenge it."
Itsuse was buried at Kameyama in Wakayama City. His large burial mound is still cared for to this day. Let's have a moment of silence for Jimmu's older brother. I know your eyes are probably filled with tears right now, but now we have to examine mirror figure 2. Here we see Itsuse having 2 arrows stuck to his shield, feeling very sad. This matches the Kiki legend narrative. And again we see the twin worlds, with the addition of an earring to indicate high birth. In Wakayama we also meet an opposer called Nakusatobe, maybe a reference to something we don't know about, so let's move on. After the burial, the fleet departs from Wakayama, going east of the Kii Peninsula. At the bottom they encounter a storm. They could not move forward and things just seem to get worse and worse. Here, Mika Irino, Jimmu's brother, said,
"Our mother and all are both coming of the seas. Why when do the waves rise to drown us?"
Then he crossed to Tokuyo no Kuni, that is the afterlife or eternal land in old Shinto, linked with the east coast of the Kii Peninsula. This also means that he drowned probably. On pottery, Tokuyo is depicted as a big tree in the center of the earth, with a weaving hall at top, like a Shinto version of Valhalla almost. Inahi, Jimmu's brother, also said,
Even though our ancestor is a kami of the heavens and our mother is a kami of the seas, why are we forced to suffer on the land and to suffer on the sea?"
Then he drew his sword and leapt into the sea, morphing into a wani with a sword, called Sabamuchi no Kami. I think it's like a reference to the Hige Hohodemi story. Somehow they managed to free themselves of the storm by rowing really hard, and they reached Miwa and climbed up to worship Amano Iwatate, the stone shield of heaven. After that they sailed to Kumano village and disembarked the army. Depending on the version, they either encounter a big bear kami or 2 opposers, immediately followed by the entire army collapsing of illness. Amaterasu Okami and Takagi no Kami summon Takemika Tsuchi. They say, "It seems that Japan is in dreadful chaos. Go down and help them, Takemika Tsuchi." Then he responds,
"There is no need for it. I'll just send them the swords I used to pacify the land."
Depending on the version, these are either given directly to Jinmu or dropped into a storehouse, then delivered to him by a helper. He receives the swords Sachifutsu no Kami, Mikafutsu no Kami, and Futsu no Mitama. Upon receiving them, the army miraculously recover. Today they are enshrined at Isunokami Jingu in Nara, which is associated with the Mononoke clan. Takemika Tsuchi is a sword god that also shows up in other places. At one point, the Izumo province opposed the appointment of Ninigi as ruler. Takemika Tsuchi was sent down to deal with the matter. He sat on the pointy end of his sword and tried to convince Susanoo's descendants to transfer the land, but he only got them to agree after a wrestling match. He also shows up in Edo pits, holding down the big catfish Namazu with a big rock to prevent earthquakes. Takagi no Okami spoke again.
"It's dangerous to go alone. There will be countless multitude of kami waiting there. Let us send the great three-legged bow, Yasunukazu, from the heavens to guide him."
The crow brought them to the lower reaches of the Yoshino River in the Uda region. And in one version, they also meet 3 kami ancestors who open a rock door into Uda. And now you are probably thinking to yourself, why do we need to know all these ancestors when they aren't even relevant anymore? There is actually a very important reason why. Because it creates this collective narrative. The samurai clans would be very proud to be part of their story, and is one of the reasons why Japanese culture became the way it did. Another interesting fact you may note is that the kamis only introduce themselves to Jimmu, symbolizing acceptance of his lordship. At the Yoshino River, they meet the ukai, meaning cormorant fishers. These people train their cormorant birds to catch fish for them. Their leader is named Niemochi Higo, lad that has edible fish, and we see one of his fishermen in figure 6 on the mirror. First we see the cormorant bird reaching out to give him a fish. He wears a feather badge and body armor, wielding a shield and a sword. This implies that these people didn't just fish, but also participated in the fighting. These fishers were essential to provide the army with food, so much that they got their own kume poem. With our lined up shields, we keep fighting, on Mount Inasa, and keep the watch from between the trees. But now we are starving. Cormorant keepers of the island, come now and help us, O Cormorant Keeper Company. The Uda province was controlled by two brothers, Ukashi and Oto Ukashi. Jimmu sent out the Yatagarasu bird to them, asking them, "Peep peep peep, the descendant of the kami of the heavens has now come. Will you serve him? Peep peep peep." Ukashi shot at it with a screaming arrow and planned to trap Jimmu in a hole. However, Oto Ukashi agreed to serve and snitched on his brother. So in response, they forced Ukashi into the hole trap, crushing him. As thanks, Oto Ukashi ended up becoming the ancestor of the Moitori of Uda. Figure number 7 on the mirror depicts Oto Ukashi, the leader of the Ukashi tribe. He wields a sword, whereupon the Yatagarasu bird sits on, here depicted as a pheasant, and on his other hand a whistling arrowhead, to indicate who the figure is. The Ukashi became a part of Jimmu's fighting force after this event. At some point, Jimmu allies with the Kume tribe, their leader being Michi no Omi, the ancestor of the Otomo and Okume clans. On figure 8, we see a Kume warrior. They are known for being eager lovers. Near the figure's trousers, we see an oversized penis used for flaunting. Over his forehead is a winged plover tattoo, which allowed him to look more straightaway at maidens. Jimmu gave them special sex privileges and shared women with them, and in return got their fealty. In one instance, Jimmu gave a Kume warrior 2 women who he had taken from Uda. The warrior wields a stone club, and behind the club is a macaw monkey. The Kume worship the monkey god Saro Tahiko. Saro means monkey. When Ninigi was on his way to descent, he saw an imposing kami at the place where the roads of heaven divide. The kami had an enormous nose and was as tall as a giant. Light shined from the edges of his mouth and eyes, and none of them could outstare it. So they asked Ame no Usume for help, the kami who danced in front of the cave of heaven, to draw out Amaterasu when she was depressed. She exposed her breasts and lowered the cord of her skirt, and then started laughing. To this the kami said, "Why are you doing this?" She replied, "That is my line. Why are you taking up the road?" He then said, "I am Saro Tahiko. I heard that the child of Amaterasu will descend, so I am waiting to meet him." Following this, Ninigi descended and Saro Tahiko went to Sanada in Ise province, asking Amino Usume to escort him. After this victory, Jimmu scouted the area and met some more kami. He decided to climb to the top of Mount Takakurayama in Uda to get a good view. From here he could see directly down to Iwara village, which was filled with enemies blocking all the roads, and to the top of other mountains, spotting more enemies. And I have to make a disclaimer here, I have no idea where any of these places are, so I'm just gonna make something up. Suddenly, the kami of the heavens appeared and spoke. "Take earth from the sanctuary of Amano Kaguyama. Make 80 flat plates from it, and make vessels for sacred sake. In the same way, venerate the kami of the heavens and the kami of the earth. Purify your body and intone the charms. If you do this, your enemies will submit to you." Amano Kagoyama was positioned behind the enemy lines, so to get the Earth, Jimmu sent Shinetsuhiko and Oto Ukashi on an undercover mission to get the dirt. Shinetsuhiko decided to wear a large rain hat and worn clothes, while Oto Ukashi wore a straw raincoat trying to mimic an old woman. Jimmu wished them good luck and they set out on their mission, successfully getting past the stupid enemy army. Then they took the dirt and returned to Jimmu. From the dirt, Jimmu made plates and saga vessels. Then he traveled upstream to the new river to renovate the kamis. And then he returned and went up the Uda River. And at some point called Ashihar, the water was foaming weirdly, indicating that this was the correct spot to do the ritual. First, he made rice sweets without using water. Then poured sake into the river, making all the fish float to the surface drunk. Finally, he dug up sakaki roots and renovated the kami. Apparently, the kamis really liked this, and that is why today Shinto worship uses sake and sakaki branches in their rituals. Before the final battle, Jimmu splits his army into two groups based on Chinese philosophy. One male army which purpose was to stand and fight, and one female army to annoy and distract. The male army consisted of the strongest fighters, which is why I placed the Kumi in this base, for example. You can kind of compare them to a legion, but also not really. The female army, on the other hand, consisted of more casual fighters, which is why I placed the Ukai Fishers here. They are the auxiliary force on the battlefield. The female army was placed on Osaka Road, and the male army was placed on the mountain slopes. While it was still dark, the woman army was sent out to attack. Their mission was to extinguish the enemy fires and lure them closer to the slopes. After carrying out their mission, they went back, and with the enemy at their tail, the male army was sent forth. One Kume song goes, "Many are in the large pit dwelling of Osaka, though many are here. You were brave, lads of the Kume, with knob hammers, with stone hammers, will beat them dead." At some point, Jimmu stepped up to the front. Then, a marvelous black-eared kite flew to the tip of Jimmu's bow. It was golden and shone like lightning. It said, "Kykeliky, it's the dawn of Japan o'clock, motherfuckers." The sunrise rose over the mountains, and from it the enemy warriors were all dazzled. The bowmen could not hit their targets and were struck down. The female shamans, meant to hype up the enemy army, were scared away when they saw the Kume warriors come running for them. And so, they were pushed back. Then, Nigihayai came to support the enemy, but this did not stop Jimmu, because he had not forgotten the laws of Itsuse. They battled and they fought, until at some point they became so tired that they stopped and had a parley. Nagasune Higo sent a messenger saying,
"A long time ago, a descendant of a heavenly kami descended from the heavens in a stone ship. He is called Hushatama Nigihayai. This man has married into my family, and I consider him my lord. Are you saying that there are two children of a heavenly kami? I think you are lying."
To this, Jimmu replied,
"There are many descendants of the heavenly kami. If the Lord you serve is truly a descendant, he is sure to have something to prove it."
Nagasune Higo went to Jimmu with Nigahaya's quiver, containing an Amenohahaya arrow with magical powers of serpents. Jimmu took a look at it and said, "These are genuine," showing Nagasune Higo his own arrow. Nagasune Higo was probably hoping to give Jimmu an opportunity to surrender, but when he was hit with the Uno reverse card, it is clear that none of the two sides were willing to give up the fighting. It is here Nigihayai steps in, the other heavenly descendant. He knew that the kamis only cared about Jimmu, and thought that Nagasune Higo was a twisted character. Nigihayai decided to become a vassal of Jimmu, betraying and killing Nagasune Higo. For this, he became the ancestor of the Mononobe, Asumi and Uneme clans. Nigihayai is also believed to be the ninth figure on the mirror, having an antler-like horn on his helmet and holding his Hahaya arrow next to the shield. After the victory, the army held a big victory dance. This brings us to the final figure on the mirror, that is the dancing shaman. She has her arms raised up, wearing a bracelet of Magatama jewels, flashing her breast the same way Usume did for the gods. She dances on an overturned top, tapping a rhythm with her shoes. The circles around the mirror show spirals of fire. She could have been the ancestor of the Saome clan, known for rituals. There's also been some notes indicating women could have participated in the fighting, but that's a whole other topic. She is kicking some kind of object. This could be the head of Nagasune Hiko, depicted on the inner band of losers. After the celebrations, Jimmu and his allies built a palace in Kashirara. Jimmu became the founder of a new Yamato state as the first emperor. He created a new court together with his allies, one where each clan served a specific function. This would later be transformed into the Rituyo system in the 8th century. The Kume received the land west of Mount Inebe, called Kume no Mura, and the Ukashi received the land around Takeda no Mura, such that we were close to the emperor. Rather than displacing an existing population, Jimmu won the allegiance of the people already there. Therefore, he was remembered as a leader who had a sort of irresistible right to rule the country.